Our next guest and our final guest has spent many years working in the field of international aid. Julia Newton-Howes was born in India. She spent her childhood in Zimbabwe, when it was a very different place than it is today. She's recently been back to Zimbabwe, and I hope she will tell us a little bit about that. But these days, Julia is also the CEO of Care Australia, so she is on the very front line of the development story. Could you please welcome Julia Newton-Howes?
Thanks, Fran. I'm really pleased to be here at Womadelaide. This is a beautiful venue, and I think we've got a beautiful day to celebrate women around the world. And I'm really pleased to be part of the Just One World series, which is an opportunity to talk about big global issues. And I think the current global financial crisis is reminding all of us how important it is to have a global perspective. As Fran said, I recently went back to Zimbabwe. Actually, I left Australia really early in the morning on the 7th of February. And I think that's a date that is now seared into all of our consciousness as Black Saturday. But because I spent about 24 hours on aeroplanes and in airports, I arrived in Zimbabwe not knowing the tragedy that was unfolding here in Australia. But people started asking me about it, and I phoned back home, and it was really devastating to hear what was happening. And as I travelled around Zimbabwe, more and more people kept saying how sorry they were about the fires in Australia. Well, this is a country which has an inflation rate in the millions of percent, where the local currency has become unusable. 1 in 3 people is HIV positive, and half the population are depending on food aid to survive. And yet they really wanted to extend their sympathy and compassion for what was happening here in Australia. And I think for me this really demonstrates that we are a global village, how interconnected we all are. People on the other side of the world really care about what happens to us, and we care about them. Well, I think the bushfires were a culmination to what's been a really hot and difficult summer here in Australia. And I've looked at the temperatures over here in Adelaide on a few occasions and really felt for you trying to sleep in 40-degree heat. And it's been pretty tough in Canberra, where I live. And I'm struggling to maintain some of the plants in my garden with water restrictions. I'm sure some of you are also struggling to keep gardens alive. But of course, most of us don't depend on our gardens to survive. We don't depend on our gardens for our livelihoods and for food to eat every day. But I met many women while I was in Zimbabwe who do depend on their small gardens. And as Womadelaide said, in fact, women grow half of the world's food in these small gardens, and yet they own only 1% of the world's farmland. One of the women I met who was a farmer in Zimbabwe's name was Chingetu. And when I met Chingetu, she was bent over hoeing her fields. A beautiful field of green corn. It was dark green, probably grown up to my shoulder, with lots of cobs on it and the really healthy looking corn. She's actually a widow, and 6 children live with her, some her own and some are orphaned nieces and nephews. She's a member of a conservation farming group which Care has set up, and it helps farmers improve their yields in ways which are environmentally friendly and also really efficient, because in a country with this dreadful inflation rate, people can barely afford to buy anything. And for 2 years running, Chingetu has been voted the #1 conservation farmer by this group of about 450 farmers. The majority are women, and they play a vital role in the health and welfare of their families and communities.